Hello and welcome to the latest video interview. I'm Ben Colclough. With me is Eddy Pieniazek, our Director of Consultancy.
Well, I think 2010 turned out to be much better than a lot of people were expecting in terms of aircraft orders. We had about 1,600 gross orders. There were 200 cancellations, but that gave us a net figure of around 1,400. Compare that with 2009, where we had about 455 orders, and you can see that it's been a pretty significant improvement over that period of time. 2007 was the peak for aircraft orders in the last decade. 2009 was the trough. So you can see we've had a bit of improvement since then. In terms of who's been taking those orders, Airbus and Boeing, as you'd expect, neck and neck, about 600 aircraft each net, and about 300 aircraft for the other manufacturers, in the regional jet sector. I think the most interesting thing about what's happened last year was the number of swaps that have happened in the narrow-body market. There were about 130 narrow-bodies in total that were swapped out, and what we saw was a move from aircraft like, say, the 737-900 and 737-700. The orders for those were swapped into 737-800s. And we saw a similar thing with the Airbus product line. A lot of orders for the A319, I think about 18 total, were swapped out into larger aircraft, A320s and A321. So there's been something going on there that's quite interesting. In terms of where the orders went, Asia Pacific, as you'd probably expect, was accounted for the majority of the orders. Lessors back in the market, they placed a good string of orders as well. And interestingly enough, North America was probably the third largest provider of aircraft orders. So it's been quite an interesting time as far as the manufacturers are being concerned.
And what about deliveries for 2010 and the outlook for 2011?
Well, deliveries last year were about 5% down on 2009. We had about 1,076 jets delivered. Vast majority, 750, were narrow bodies, about 200 wide bodies, and the remainder were regional jets. As far as 2011 is concerned, I guess we still have a few issues there that we need a bit of clarity on. The 787 and the 747-8. We expect we'll be delivering. We may see somewhere between 20 and 40 of those aircraft being delivered next year. And the A380 again, Airbus is ramping up with those, probably more towards the second half of the year as the engine issues start to get resolved. So in total, I think we're expecting to see a much bigger number of deliveries next year, maybe 1,200 aircraft in total. And if we were to divide those up now, we're probably looking at about 800 narrow bodies, 240 wide bodies, about 150 regional jets as well. And the reason the deliveries are ramping up is, again, it's that issue of the ease of financing for new aircraft overall is still a big factor. It's been the driver in 2009 and 2010, and we'll see that again in 2011.
And there seems to be a lot of interest in the business jet market at the moment. Can you give us your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, it's an area that people don't pay as much attention to as with the commercial jets, but it's pretty much a very similar size market. I mean, there's about 19,000 commercial jets in service. If you look at the business jet market, we have close to 18,000 in service. So in terms of populations, it's up there. And a lot of the interest these days seems to be in the longer haul, longer range, wider cabin size, and the values there tend to be quite heavy as well. So there's a lot of investment involved. Over the past decade, we've seen about 8,000 business jets delivered as well. So again, we're seeing about 700, 800 aircraft a year being delivered. And they've gone through the same cycle as we have seen in commercial aircraft. There was, I think the low period there was about 2003, where we only had about 500 deliveries, and the peak was about 2008, where we had 1,200 deliveries. Last year we saw about 700, so again, we're picking up from a low base. We're probably expecting to see the same amount in 2011, about 700, 730. But it's going to account for about $20–25 billion worth of new business compared to, say, 65, 70 billion in the commercial jet market. So it's quite a major area that a lot of people are beginning to look into.
People are talking about the BRIC countries driving growth in the business jet markets. Would you agree?
Well, yeah, if you look at the BRIC countries, which are Brazil, Russia, India and China, we're seeing some mixed results from there. All of them are showing growth, but to different degrees. I think the biggest growth we've seen in the BRIC countries as far as business jet demand is concerned is in Brazil, where the fleet has grown quite drastically over the last 3 or 4 years. Russia, there's a lot of debate over how many aircraft are actually operating in and out of Russia as opposed to which ones are registered or domiciled in Russia. Russia has taken very few deliveries, but there are a lot of aircraft operating on the periphery of Russia which are servicing that particular market. India has started to grow, but it's been fairly flat for the past couple of years, but again we can see some movement there picking up again, so we're expecting more from India over the next 2 or 3 years. And probably of those 4 countries, China is probably the one that is showing the most recent surge, pretty much flatlining in terms of the kind of deliveries that they've experienced over the past, say, 20 years. I mean, the fleet's gone from 20 to 40 aircraft during the 90s and from 40 to 80 aircraft during the 2000s. It's not going to take another 10 years to double again. It's going to happen very quickly. China has got very large appetite for business aircraft for a variety of reasons, whether it's for personal wealth within the country or for corporate and business use.
Well, you mentioned China. Can you think of any particular obstacles to growth in that market?
Yes, there are obstacles to overcome if you want to fly within China. Some of the major ones revolve around the way the airspace is handled. There are infrastructure issues such as not enough airports in the regional areas. There are tax issues in terms of importing aircraft. There's a lack of people and experienced people, whether it's air traffic control or engineers or FBOs. And also, I think the big issue there is the access to the air. Now, the access to the air is the one that is probably foremost in a lot of people's minds, especially those that want to fly into China. The airspace is controlled by the military. It favours the commercial airliners over corporate. You have to file your plans in advance, and there's lots of issues there that are being resolved. China recently started to create some reforms that started to open up the airspace, not just for business aviation, but I think specifically for general aviation as well. And on the back of that, if those kind of reforms carry on going forwards, we can see an opportunity there, to go from say 100 aircraft now in the business aircraft sector to about 700 within 10 years. So the opportunities are there. The reforms are beginning to take place in terms of being more flexible to the business aviation market, and especially so as the general aviation market. And China being China, they don't just want to fly the airplanes, they're going to want to supply the airplanes as well. So the Chinese manufacturers are gearing up to support that as well. It's a very exciting part of the world at the moment.
Thank you very much, Eddy.
You're welcome.
And you can get your copy of the latest edition of Viewpoint on our website. Thank you very much.